members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
My father came to the Hawaiian island and worked on the sugar cane. He eventually made his way to California, and he bought some land west of Gridley. During that period of time, there was what they call Asian land law, and Asian couldn't own land and couldn't own business. We had a friend, and we used his name because he was a citizen, and that's how we got around the Asian land law. This was during the Depression time, so it was very difficult. We had a family of 5 boys and 2 girls until we started getting older and contributing to the farm. It was just my father, and it was just work, work, work. And eventually, orchards started to pay off and making some money. We were accepted as a fellow American before the war, and the December 7th, 1941, when Japan bombed the Hawaiian Islands. The next day was Monday. We went into town, and there was something different in town that wasn't there December 6th.
If I had a my way, Lord, if I had a my way, I would tie Tokyo down.
On February 19th, 1942, the President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066. This executive order forced all the people that was Japanese ancestry to evacuate from your home. Some places, like if you lived close to the West Coast, you were given just days to pack up and leave. Most people that had homes or businesses, there wasn't enough time to close your business or pack your things. Some warehouses refused to store anything belonging to the Japanese. Our crop was ready to harvest in July, and then we left, we evacuated. But our neighbors came and said, "Don't worry about your crop." They said, "We'll take care of, we'll harvest your crop for us." We got on the train at the Gridley Depot on July 9th, my brother's birthday, and on July 10th, we were in Tule Lake.
I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad, Lord, Lord, it ain't gonna be treated this way.
I think Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066, and that the Army took the ball and ran with it and finally issued their infamous order to round up all persons of Japanese descent, with in large response to political pressure coming from white Californians who were overwhelmingly prejudiced against the Japanese and the Japanese Americans, who had been subject to all kinds of racial restrictions and discriminations for years. For them, Pearl Harbor represented an opportunity to take care of the Japanese problem.
The Japanese have made good use of the offensive spirit which inspires their people.
So there's a whole history behind Roosevelt's signing of the Executive Order 9066. It's a history that, goes back to the beginning of the founding of the country. There was a lot of fear about Asian immigrants in particular, and that sort of fear and paranoia about what's going to happen to the sort of American identity if all of these immigrants are coming from Asia, bringing their cultural background, competing for jobs. People got caught up in this fear of what could happen, of a scenario of Japanese spying or attacks on the West Coast. Of course, there were no instances of Japanese spying on the West Coast. But the fear of that, and then really blanketing a whole group of people with that fear and just assuming that all of these people are suspect, it's crazy.
If you've never had a friend that was Japanese or Muslim or Hindu, how could you possibly know what it feels like to be that person?
The only thing that is different, as far as I'm concerned, is how I look, my ancestry. I don't look white, I look Japanese. To the people that start to discriminate against us, I'm different now. I had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. There's Japanese in Japan, and there's Japanese in America. But we're two different people. It's just like the Germans in America and Germans in Germany.
The overwhelmingly racist component of this roundup and incarceration is pretty starkly revealed when you contrast how the Japanese enemy alien population was handled in comparison with the German and Italian American enemy alien population. As of December 7th, 1941, there were still in this country over 300,000 German immigrants who had not yet become American citizens. So they were citizens of Nazi Germany. And then if you look in the Italian American community, there were nearly 700,000 who had not yet become citizens of the United States. The Japanese population was about 120,000 altogether, 2/3 of whom were citizens. The federal government dealt much differently with Italian and Germans. There were restrictions on them. They didn't get off scot-free because they were white. But the vast majority were subjected simply to small things like curfews and travel restrictions. They had to register with the federal government, but there was no mass roundup. There was no mass incarceration.
Now don't you cry, when I am gone. Now don't you cry, when I am gone. Now don't you cry, when I am gone. 'Cause when I hear your name, I think of home. I hear a train come down that line.
You can only take what you could carry. When we got on the train, the first thing was pull down the shades. And we had soldiers on both ends of the train. Took us 2 days to get to Tule Lake. We got off the train on July 10th, and we were assigned to Block 42. These are barracks that are 120 feet long. Some rooms had as many as 6 or even possibly 7 in a space of 20 feet by 20 feet. So it was very crowded. The people that had families, they hung sheets for privacy. And there's nothing in there except single light bulb, a potbelly stove for heat in the wintertime, and a cot. Within 4 months, we had about 18,000 people moved in. It was a new city. This was probably the largest population north of Sacramento. Tule Lake itself is a desert, sagebrush, and rattlesnake. And in the summertime, the temperature gets up to 100 degrees or better. We have whirlwinds that go by every once in a while. You had dust and dirt on everything.
The internment camp were not happy places, and the internment camp itself was a euphemism that the government used to make things look much nicer than they actually were. But what these things were prison camps. And they were prisons built for people who had not been accused of any crime, had not been convicted of any crime, but who were racially profiled.
Our Constitution says we have certain inalienable rights as an American citizen. They ignore that. That's what they did when they put the citizen in these concentration camps.
These young Americans of Japanese descent were particularly shocked and outraged by what happened because they had assumed and they learned in school that they had these constitutional rights, and then these rights are violated.
Why are you asking an American citizen to be interned? We wanted to be treated like American citizens, and we weren't.
Long ago I was known and respected. One day I was falsely suspected. They put me in chain, working out in the rain. But I'm free from the chain gang now. I'm free from the shackles that bound me. Free from the guards all around me. Like a bird in a tree, gain my liberty. But I'm free from the chain gang now.
The people that were interned in these internment camps or concentration camps, they're disappearing. The people that are here today are offsprings of their parents who were interned. Either that or these younger people were born here. It took me 50 years to talk about this.
My sister and I never knew of most of this stuff. I just marvel at the fact that I didn't know anything. How could you grow up and not know this? From time to time, I'd hear my parents with friends of theirs, and they didn't know that I was listening, but every now and then I'd catch, references to camp. And I never really understood what that was, but the way they said it, I knew it wasn't like the happy camp, where kids get to go and, have a good time.
I think silence is often the way that Japanese people deal with painful realities.
My mom was very proper. Her attitude was, it happened, we can't do anything to change it, and there's no reason to discuss it, to bring it up.
As you see, my grandfather's not really the quiet type, but I think that my grandmother was. And I think he loved my grandmother so much that decided in himself that he was just not going to talk about it because it caused her so much pain.
There are some things that I hear my dad say that every now and then is very startling to me.
1943, they passed out the so-called loyalty form. The question 27 and 28. 27 was more straightforward, that you would protect the Constitution in America by joining the military. 28 was a little different. 28 had to do with cutting all ties with Japan and the emperor. The people that refused to fill out this form and those who wrote no to these two questions were not saying that they were disloyal. They were protesting to the government that you can't do this to an American citizen. The administration of Tule Lake says if you don't fill out this form, you're liable for $10,000 fine, 20 years in jail. And we ignored the threat and we refused to fill out this form.
Tule Lake became the place where those Japanese and Japanese Americans who were resisting the federal policy, who were not cooperating in the camps, who were not signing the loyalty oath, who were resisting the irony of being asked to serve in the United States military, they were singled out as troublemakers, as disloyal. And they were removed from the populations of all the camps and brought together at Tule Lake. Those who refused to sign were not disloyal. In fact, many of them refused to answer those questions precisely because they were loyal Americans and they found the questions insulting.
Block 42, there was 36 people who refused to fill out this form. And for this, we was put in a county jail. And we was in county jail for about a week. And then we was transferred to another camp. This was a CCC camp. When we arrived at the CCC camp, our truck driver that took us from the county jail to the camp says, "This is your new home, so clean out the mess hall and one of the barracks." We needed a guard to do what we usually do. And my job at that particular time was to take the truck and load the garbage from the kitchen and dispose of the garbage at the garbage dump. And I asked this guard if he knew any Japanese people, and he says, "I'm from San Francisco, and my best friend is Japanese." And he says, "I'm sorry for what you people are going through, an American citizen in the United States." Or one night, we were in bed when a soldier running through our barracks shouting, "Get your ass out of here and line up outside." And when we went outside, it was dark. We could hear something, but we couldn't make it out. And he turned on the bright lights, and the noise was coming from the soldiers loading their weapons. There was about 15 soldiers and a machine gun, and we could see the hole in the barrel of the weapon. A thought goes through my mind, we're standing in front of a firing squad. And you wondered, what are you going to do when they start shooting? The officer in charge came forward and says, nobody was going to escape while he was in charge. He repeated this several times. And then he says, go back to bed. Next morning, they started to interview us. And when my name was called, they asked me if I would fill out the same forms that I refused to fill out before. And I says, no. And I told them the reason I'm not filling this out is I'm an American citizen. I asked why my constitutional rights were taken away. Well, after that, they told me I could return to my address in Block 42. And sometime in the fall, they told us, get ready, we're going to take you home to your town in Gridley. February 26, 1944, I was home in Gridley. My parents, my sister, my younger brother and I, the five of us, we were home.
It was so hard for Japanese Americans, both during internment and then after. When they came back, they were often not welcome in their communities. There were signs put up, Japs not welcome here.
We had discrimination in Gridley, people on the streets, the merchants that we knew. The worst discrimination, other than the government, was that I met my school teacher. And I knew this school teacher real well. When I met him, I stuck out my hand and he says, "You're on the wrong side." And he turned his back and he walked away. And most people were, the story is pretty much the same. When they came back, they run into discrimination.
I wasn't aware that, he felt, this discrimination post-war, after having returned, after having us, and that from time to time he would still feel, some of the negative prejudice, discrimination, that sort of thing. And so it startles me to hear that.
The people who were adults during internment, they're aging and dying, and so this is an untold history to a great extent. To hear from people who were there and experienced it themselves, that's invaluable.
It's incredible. I think the world of my dad to manage to get on the other side of this thing. I think I would have come out so bitter that I would have been useless as a human being.
My grandpa's a rock star. That's a true patriot.
There was a formal apology to the Japanese Americans and Japanese people who were interned. And there were reparations, but it came some 40 years later. It took a long time. Some of the people that had been in the camps had died. The families that had lost so much of their livelihood and their possessions, that was gone. More than anything else, it was a symbolic gesture by the government to acknowledge that it was caused by racism and war hysteria, and that there wasn't really any justification.
We must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake.
The president apologized to us for what they did, and we were reimbursed by the government $20,000, which wasn't enough, but we agreed that the $20,000 was a token.
I don't want your greenback dollar. I don't want your silver chain to blow out your dirty brain.
Japanese American internment was a national disgrace.
Look how an American family's life can be transformed in a matter of days. Everything you took for granted, everything you felt secure in as American, all of a sudden it disappears. Not because of anything you did. We have this ongoing history of, scapegoating minorities, of persecuting minorities, of misunderstanding their cultures. I mean, all of this continues.
I do a lot of talking to different schools now, and most of them can't believe that this could happen in America to an American citizen. What happened to Japanese American in 1942, I'm sure it's going to happen again. Everybody says, I hope it doesn't happen. Well, I hope that we didn't get put in behind barbed wires too, but we ended behind barbed wires.
I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad, Lord, Lord. It ain't gonna be treated this way. Oh, they put me in a jailhouse on my knees. They put me in a jailhouse